The ballroom glitters like something out of a movie. Gold chandeliers hang from the ceiling, and cameras flash everywhere as Helen stands on stage in her perfect blue dress, crying perfect tears. She's accepting some award called Compassion in Action, and she's thanking my mother for inspiring her life's work. My dead mother, the one Helen barely knew. My father stands beside me, his hand on my shoulder, beaming with pride. I stand there in my stiff suit, jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. My small leather notebook sits in my jacket pocket, pressing against my ribs like a secret. Then it happens. I shift my weight, and the notebook slips out, tumbling through the air in slow motion. It hits the marble floor with a sound that cuts through all the applause. Thud. Aunt Lydia, my mother's sister, bends down to pick it up. She flips it open, probably just to see whose it is. Then she freezes. Her eyes scan the page, then dart up to Helen on stage, then down to me. The color drains from her face. My stomach drops like I've just been pushed off a cliff. Helen turns toward us, still smiling for the cameras. Sweetheart, what's wrong? I can't answer. I can't breathe. My name is Noah Cole. I'm 12 years old, and that night at the gala was when my whole life exploded into pieces. But to understand why, you need to know how it started. Stay with me until the end, and I'll show you exactly how a notebook full of truth destroyed a woman everyone thought was a saint. It began 2 years earlier on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Dad's car pulled into the driveway, and there she was in the passenger seat. Helen. She had dark hair that fell in perfect waves, and she wore a cream-colored sweater that looked expensive. When she smiled at me, her teeth were perfectly white. Noah, this is Helen, Dad said, his voice nervous and hopeful at the same time. She's going to be staying with us for a while. She knelt down to my level, smelling like lilacs and something else I couldn't name. I've heard so much about you, she said softly. I hope we can be friends. Mom was still alive then, but she wasn't home. She was in the hospital again, the place she'd been going to more and more. Dad said she was getting help for her sadness. Helen moved in that same day. The first breakfast Helen made was pancakes. She played cheerful music in the kitchen and hummed along, flipping golden circles onto plates. Dad sat at the table reading the news on his tablet, and I sat across from him, picking at my food. Noah slept wonderfully last night, Helen announced, setting a glass of orange juice in front of Dad. Didn't you, sweetheart? I hadn't. I'd woken up at 2 in the morning to a sound outside my door, whispering. When I pressed my ear to the wood, I heard Helen's voice, soft and cold. Your mother's not coming back, you know? You might as well get used to it. I stared at her now across the kitchen. She was smiling, waiting for me to agree. I heard you last night, I said quietly. Outside my door. Helen's smile didn't move. Dad looked up. What did she say? She said Mom wasn't coming back. Dad laughed softly, the way adults do when they think a kid is confused. Noah, she'd never say that. You must have been dreaming. Helen walked over and squeezed my shoulder, her fingers pressing just a little too hard. See, dear? We don't want to upset him with silly dreams. That night, I tried to call Mom at the hospital. I used the phone in the hallway, the old one with the curly cord. My fingers shook as I dialed the number I'd memorized. Before it could ring, Helen appeared behind me. She didn't say anything. She just reached over my shoulder and pressed the button to end the call. Then she took the phone from my hand and hung it back on the wall. Bedtime, she said. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling her eyes on my back. When I got to my room, I heard the lock click from the outside. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't open. Helen, I called. It's for your own safety, Noah, she said through the door. You've been sleepwalking. I hadn't been sleepwalking. I pressed my forehead against the wood and listened to her footsteps fade down the hall. The next morning, Dad asked me how I slept. Before I could answer, Helen spoke up. He was screaming about monsters all night. Poor thing. I think he's having nightmares about his mother. Dad believed her. He always believed her. That afternoon, I found an old notebook in my desk drawer. I opened it to the first page and wrote, She lies beautifully. Visiting day at the hospital was every Saturday. Mom sat behind a glass partition in a small room that smelled like bleach and sadness. Her face was thinner than I remembered, and her hands trembled when she reached toward the glass. "How are you, baby?" she asked, her voice scratchy through the speaker. "I'm okay." She leaned closer, her eyes sharp despite how tired she looked. "Don't trust her, Noah. Helen. She's not what she seems." Before I could ask what she meant, the door behind Mom opened. Helen walked in carrying a bouquet of yellow flowers, her face full of concern. "Oh, sweetheart," Helen said to a passing nurse, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The delusions come and go. It's so hard to watch." Mom's face crumpled. She looked at me through the glass, and I saw something break behind her eyes. Helen set the flowers on a table and came to stand beside me. She squeezed my shoulder again, that same too-hard grip. "You see why we have to protect you?" she whispered in my ear. I nodded, because what else could I do? Helen became the neighborhood angel in less than 3 months. She organized bake sales for the school. She volunteered at the soup kitchen. She went to church every Sunday and sat in the front row, singing hymns with her eyes closed. People stopped me on the street. "Your stepmom's amazing, Noah," Mrs. Patterson from down the block said. "You're so lucky to have her." At home, it was different. Helen would stand in the doorway of my room and criticize everything. My voice was too quiet. My posture was too slouched. My silence made me look suspicious. "You have to be better," she'd say, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Or people will think you're like her. Broken." One day, we went to the grocery store together. People waved at Helen, and she waved back, all warmth and light. As we walked through the aisles, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Smile, Noah. They're watching." So I smiled, and everyone believed everything was perfect. The phone rang late on a Thursday night in December. I was already in bed, but I heard it through the wall. Dad's footsteps rushed down the hall. I heard him pick up, heard his voice say hello, then silence. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. "She's gone." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. I heard Helen's footsteps next. Heard her comforting my father, her voice soft and soothing. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." When I came downstairs, Dad was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. Helen stood behind him, rubbing his shoulders like a saint. She looked up at me, and for just a second, I saw something in her face. Not sadness, not even surprise, just calm. "Your mother's finally at peace," Helen said gently. I stared at her perfect, composed face, and something cold settled in my chest. I went back to my room, pulled out my notebook, and wrote, "She killed her softly." I didn't mean Helen had murdered her, but she hadn't tried to stop her from dying either. She rearranged the furniture, saying the house needed a fresh start. She threw away Mom's clothes, her books, even the photos on the walls. When I asked if I could keep Mom's necklace, Helen said gently, "It's better if we don't hold on to painful reminders." Dad called her the glue holding us together. Helen also decided I couldn't visit Mom's grave until I was emotionally ready. She said it would be too traumatic, that I needed time to heal first. But weeks turned into months, and she never brought it up again. One night at dinner, Helen set down her fork and smiled at both of us. "We're a real family now," she said. Dad reached over and squeezed her hand. "We are." I kept eating, saying nothing. But later, in my notebook, I wrote, "She's erasing Mom like she never existed." Helen had this trick she did. She'd say something mean or threatening, and then later, when I brought it up, she'd act like I'd imagined it. "I never said that, Noah. Are you feeling okay?" She told my teacher I was having imaginary conversations, and that I sometimes confused dreams with reality. The teacher looked at me with pity after that. I started to question my own memory. Did she really say that? Did that really happen? Everything blurred together. At night, I'd check my notebook, reading my own handwriting over and over. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that her version wasn't the truth. I wrote, "If I forget, her version becomes the truth." A letter arrived in the mail one afternoon, addressed to my father. I saw the return address before Helen snatched it away. Lydia Brennan. My mom's sister. Aunt Lydia. Helen held it up to the light, then set it on the counter. Later that day, I heard her on the phone with Dad. Lydia wants to visit. I don't think it's a good idea. She's still so angry, so toxic. It'll just upset Noah. That night, I found the letter in the trash, torn into pieces. I carefully put the pieces together on my bedroom floor like a puzzle and copied Aunt Lydia's address into the back of my notebook. Dad's coworkers came over for dinner one Friday night. Helen cooked a roast and wore a dress that made her look like someone from a magazine. She spent the whole evening praising me. "Noah's my little miracle," she said, touching my hair. "I don't know what I'd do without him." Everyone smiled. I tried to smile back. Then I dropped my fork. It clattered against my plate, loud in the quiet room. Helen's hand landed on my shoulder, gripping hard enough to bruise. But her face stayed soft, her smile never wavering. Beneath the table, where no one could see, her nails dug into my skin. She leaned close, her breath warm against my ear. "Don't make me fix you like I fixed your mother." Helen convinced Dad to send me to counseling. "He's so withdrawn," she told him. "So unstable. I think he needs professional help." The therapist's office smelled like vanilla candles. Helen sat in on every session, answering questions before I could. She talked about how hard it was to mother a grieving child, how I wouldn't let her in, how she worried about my emotional state. The therapist nodded along, taking notes. "You're doing a wonderful job," she told Helen. "Many stepmothers wouldn't be this devoted." Helen smiled, all humility and grace. "I just want him to be okay." On the drive home, she glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "See, Noah? Even professionals agree." For Mom's birthday, I secretly mailed a card to Aunt Lydia. I used my allowance to buy a stamp and walked to the mailbox alone. Inside the card, I wrote, "I miss Mom. I wish you could visit." A week later, Helen stormed into my room without knocking. She was holding the card, or what was left of it. Somehow she'd gotten it back. "You don't listen," she hissed. She pulled a lighter from her pocket, lit the corner of the card, and held it up while it burned. The flames curled around the edges, turning the paper black. Smoke filled the room. "Do you see what happens when you disobey me?" she asked, her voice calm. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. That night, I wrote, "She loves to watch things disappear." Helen came up with the idea for a foundation. "We'll raise money for mental health awareness," she announced at dinner. "In your mother's honor, of course." Dad's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, Helen." I felt sick. Helen practiced speeches in front of the bathroom mirror. I'd walk past and see her, adjusting her expression, trying out different tones. "My husband's late wife struggled so deeply," she'd say to her reflection. "And now we carry her legacy forward." She was using Mom's death to make herself look good, to feed her image. I whispered to my notebook, "She's using her death to feed herself." The gala was Helen's biggest event yet. She bought me a new suit and told me exactly what to say if reporters asked questions. "If anyone asks how you're doing, you say, 'Helen helped me heal.'" I repeated the line back to her. She smiled, satisfied. "You'll thank me one day, Noah. When you're older, you'll understand everything I've done for you." I nodded. But inside, I was already planning. The ballroom was massive, filled with round tables covered in white cloth and centerpieces made of roses. People in expensive clothes stood around talking and laughing. Helen floated through the crowd like she owned the place. Then I saw her, Aunt Lydia. She stood near the back wall, smaller and older than I remembered, her hair streaked with gray. She looked nervous, out of place. Helen saw her too. For half a second, her face went blank. Then she rushed over, arms open wide. "Lydia, how wonderful you could come." She hugged Aunt Lydia like they were old friends. Lydia hugged back, but her eyes found mine over Helen's shoulder. She looked worried. The lights dimmed. Helen walked onto the stage, the spotlight following her. She stood behind the microphone and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This foundation means everything to me because it represents hope. It represents love. It represents my late husband's first wife, who struggled so bravely with her inner demons. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Helen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She taught me that compassion isn't just a feeling, it's action. And tonight we take action together. Applause exploded through the room. People stood up, clapping. Dad was crying. I stood up too, mechanical, empty. The strap of my bag slipped off my shoulder. I tried to catch it, but my notebook tumbled out, hit the marble floor with a thud, and slid under the table. Aunt Lydia bent down and picked it up. She opened it to the first page, just to see whose it was. Then she stopped. Her face went pale. Her hands started shaking. She flipped to the next page, then the next. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked up at me, then at Helen on stage, then back at me. She whispered, "Dear God." Aunt Lydia didn't say anything that night. She hugged me before she left, longer than normal, and whispered, "I believe you." But she didn't confront Helen. She didn't tell Dad. She just started visiting more often, showing up at the house unannounced. She'd sit with me, ask me questions, watch Helen carefully. Helen grew tense. She snapped at Lydia over small things, made excuses to cut visits short. One afternoon, Lydia and I were sitting in the backyard when Helen came outside. "Noah has homework to do, Lydia. Maybe it's time for you to go." Lydia stood slowly. "I'll see you soon, Noah." As she walked toward her car, Helen hissed under her breath, "Stay away from her." Helen worked on Dad next. She told him that Lydia was corrupting me, filling my head with lies about her, trying to turn me against the family. Dad believed her just like always. He sat me down one night. "Aunt Lydia isn't allowed to visit anymore." "I'm sorry, Noah, but it's for your own good." I nodded, but inside, my chest ached. The next week, Lydia showed up anyway. Dad met her at the door and told her to leave. Through the window, I saw Lydia mouth the words to me, "I believe you." Helen stood behind Dad, arms crossed, smirking. Family drama is so exhausting. A few days later, a teacher handed me an envelope at school. "A woman dropped this off for you," she said. I opened it in the bathroom. Inside was my notebook, the one Lydia had picked up at the gala. There was also a note, written in her handwriting, "Keep writing. I'll know when it's time." I felt something shift inside me. Hope, maybe, or defiance. That night, I started writing again. Not out of fear this time, out of purpose. Helen noticed the ink stains on my fingers at breakfast. Her eyes narrowed. "What have you been doing?" "Homework." I lied. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. Helen's perfect image started to crack. She snapped at a neighbor who parked too close to our driveway. She scolded volunteers at church for not folding programs correctly. Little things, but people noticed. Dad defended her. "She's just stressed. She does so much." But I saw the doubt creeping into his face. One night, Helen forgot to close my door all the way. I heard her on the phone in her room. "I don't care what they think," she hissed. "I've worked too hard for this." I wrote in my notebook, "Even angels crumble when no one's watching." Helen insisted on hosting a family dinner to reconcile. She wanted to prove that everything was fine, that we were all one big happy family. She spent days cleaning the house, cooking, setting the table with our best dishes. Relatives arrived, cousins I barely knew, aunts and uncles who praised Helen's warmth. Aunt Lydia came too. Dad had reluctantly agreed to let her attend. She walked in calmly, carrying a small purse, and sat at the far end of the table. Next to her wine glass, she set my notebook. Dinner went smoothly at first. Helen told stories, made everyone laugh, played the perfect hostess. Then, as dessert was being served, Helen stood up. "I just want to say how grateful I am for all of you. Family is everything. And I'm so blessed to be part of this one." People murmured agreement. Dad squeezed her hand. Aunt Lydia picked up my notebook and opened it. "Before we finish," she said quietly, "maybe it's time we listen to Noah for once." The room went silent. Helen's smile froze. Lydia began to read. October 10th. She said Mom's not coming back. Dad didn't believe me. She flipped the page. November 3rd. She locked my door and told Dad I was screaming about monsters. Helen's face turned white. Lydia, stop this. December 15th. She told the nurse Mom was delusional. Mom cried. People shifted uncomfortably. Dad stared at Helen, his mouth open. He's sick, Helen shouted. He's delusional, just like his mother. He makes things up. Lydia kept reading. January 8th. She burned my birthday card. She said I should stop remembering. The room was so quiet you could hear breathing. Dad's voice came out in a whisper. Helen, stop. The room exploded. Relatives started talking at once, asking questions, remembering moments that had never quite made sense. Helen tried to flee, grabbing her purse, but Dad stepped in front of the door. Is it true? He asked, his voice shaking. Helen didn't answer. She just stood there, trembling, her perfect mask shattered. Aunt Lydia walked over and pulled me into a hug. I pressed my face into her shoulder and finally let myself cry. Helen collapsed into a chair, staring at the floor. You ruined everything, she whispered to me. Weeks later, Helen was gone. Dad said she went somewhere to get help. But I never saw her again. The foundation quietly dissolved. Dad started going to therapy. I moved in with Aunt Lydia. Her house was smaller, quieter, but it felt safe. She let me visit Mom's grave whenever I wanted. One afternoon, I sat at Lydia's kitchen table with my notebook open in front of me. I turned to the last blank page and wrote, Everyone thought she was kind, but kindness shouldn't hurt. I closed the notebook and set down my pen. For the first time in 2 years, I smiled. A real smile. Through the window, I could see the sun setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Aunt Lydia called from the other room, asking if I wanted hot chocolate. Yeah, I called back. I do, and I meant it.